Hello, and welcome to Atypical the podcast where we look at life from a more atypical perspective. I'm Simon, he there, your host, and I'm joined by our wonderful, wonderful guest who came on our first After Dark episode, the lovely Dahlia. Hello.
Hi, I'm Dahlia, she, her.
Lovely to have you back on again. How's everything going?
Yeah, things are going all right. There's actually a lot of change going on at the moment. I mean, I've talked a bit about my work, and that's something I'm able to talk about on a non-After Dark.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I'm thinking about semi-retiring and going a bit sort of seasonal with my with my work, so that hopefully I can find something more in line with some of my interests, my many interests. So I'm going to see how that goes.
Oh, well, I mean, that sounds like a reasonably positive approach to it. I mean, taking some time to do the thing you want to do, something more aligned with your studies, perhaps, or maybe even try and get that PhD funding for the research you want to do.
I'm working on it. I'm actually working on it right
exciting.
now. Yeah.
Well, we look forward to hearing all about that because it did sound fascinating. So I thought it is, in fact, at the moment it's just the two of us. I don't know if anyone's going to join us or not, but I've been thinking about labels of late. You know, how we classify people, what we call ourselves, that sort of, I suppose, shorthand for explaining something very complex about ourselves. And I mean, we use all sorts of labels all the time, don't we? We use them to describe ourselves as, I'm queer. I'm autistic. I have ADHD. Some of these are medicalized labels, like the ADHD refers to a well understood and defined, effectively, a medical condition. But queer is much more complex. And I mean, what do you feel about labels? I mean, why do we use them, and are they still helpful?
Oh, I definitely think they're still helpful, and I generally am quite pro labels, but I think that it's always a case of like, sometimes people get very, sort of, I don't know, telegraphy about it, and complain about the existence of labels and whatever, because they're uncomfortable with it, and like they're actually. But I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. Like I think labels are completely necessary, not just as a diagnostic tool when it's something to do with your, I don't know, how your body works or how your brain works, or like something, medicalized. But also in terms of identity labels, like I find them really useful. I think that many people find it helpful that there are words out there to describe how they feel about themselves. And I think they're also like essential for people to sort of organize under. For example, like political movements, which people organize for their rights and so on, like the civil rights movement, or gay rights, or trans rights. Labels are essential for something like that because people need to people identify with them, and they also need to stand up together and say this is a name that we all share because this is who we are. It doesn't mean that those people are saying that we're all the exact same as each other. It just means that these people are saying that perhaps this is a label that we all fall under, as an umbrella. That was a bit of a long description.
I thought it was great.
I didn't really plan any of it. It was just sort of like trying to.
We like that kind of freewheeling, and we have in fact just been joined by another co-host.
Lovely.
Hello, Joey.
Hi.
Oh my word.
What? Oh. I've still got my voice changer on, haven't I? Bear with.
Can you just leave it on for a moment and just do the Jackbox thing for me?
Which oh, Which the
It sounds like the Jackbox murder party. It's just
oh,
Ah.
who's gonna die? Everyone.
yes.
Right, there we go.
Okay. Oh my God. Oh, you're back. Thank God for that.
Back to me. Yes.
Back to you. Back to lovely you. So, Joey, we are talking about labels this evening.
Mm-hmm.
And Dahlia's just been giving us sort of some of her thoughts on whether or not they're necessary and how they can help to build communities by people identifying under single labels. How do you feel about labels in general? Are they helpful? Do they sometimes cause disruption? Are they still useful in society now?
I mean, labels are nice. They allow you to feel part of some form of group or community. Even if you don't spend time with people in that community, you can feel part of something. And as human beings, we are very social. We're very group driven, and that sort of wanting to feel like you belong is nice. The problem generally with labels is if you are part of a group that identifies as one particular thing and you don't, and you are then put in a situation where you are pretending to identify as a label. And it doesn't matter whether it's your sexuality, it could be a different religion. You could have a completely different political or philosophical view to the people that you spend time with, and you immediately feel alienated because you don't fit into that box that label particularly fits to. But it depends how much power you put into a label. And most of that in a tolerant society anyway is in your head. Most of it. You can be a man and not give a shit that you're a man, or you can be burdened by the fact that you feel alienated in the situation you are. You feel burdened by the fact that you're gay, or the fact that you're a liberal Democrat. I don't know what it is that you might want to be.
I mean,
burdened.
you'd be very burdened if you're a liberal Democrat.
Yes, you would. But it's the weight you put behind the label which probably causes the danger. Obviously, there are people who are in situations where they are genuinely unsafe, and I'm not belittling or taking away from the genuine danger of being a gay person in Iran, for instance, or anything like that, because those are very genuine situations. But for the most part, if you don't want to associate with a label that you've been given, and wrongly given, which is sort of what the song by the Ting Tings, that's not my name.
It's not my name.
Yep.
Yes.
That's what that's about, because that essentially they are being given a label, and it doesn't matter whether it's, you're the funny one or you're the sassy one or whatever it is. It's a label that you don't associate with, and that's probably when it's not helpful. When labels are projected onto you, I think that's where the damage is. If you freely want to associate as something, knock yourself out. You're not hurting anyone.
I completely agree. I mean, there's a huge difference between being labelled something and then giving yourself a name or a label.
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's sort of self-assigned labels, and there are labels which are assigned to you by other people. And I think labels can be very useful. They provide a shorthand when we're communicating something about ourselves to others. They give us a sense of identity and community, because we can, all of us on this podcast, we're all atypical. We all have some form of neurodiversity. That is an umbrella term which assigns itself to a whole bunch of different things which we feel, which creates a community for us. And I think there is power and use in these sort of labels. But one of the things I was talking to a friend of the show, Sam, the other day about this. We were sort of walking over the Long Mynd, and we ended up having a conversation about what certain words meant. And whilst we both identify as being sort of somewhere within the queer spectrum, we actually had slightly different views on what certain words meant. So I think it might be quite interesting to just sort of take a couple of minutes to see what we think different words mean. So I'm going to throw a couple out to you both, and I'd like to hear what you think of them. So, gay and lesbian, what do they mean?
I mean, as a lesbian, I'm happy to
Yeah?
I'm happy to give my 2 cents. at least on being a lesbian.
Mhm.
I think that, I mean, a lot of people, or most people even, identify lesbians as like strictly as women who form sexual relationships with other women. But I would say that my personal sort of understanding of it is actually so much more, I don't know, so like very different than that. Like,
Rather more nuanced.
yeah, nuance is the word. I mean, yes, I'm attracted to women, and yes, I also identify as a woman, but I also identify as genderqueer, and I don't feel, I don't kind of always think of my relationships as women with women, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, also outside of this, I have had many a sexual encounter with people who don't identify as women, including plenty of cis men, just because, I don't know, I felt like it.
Yeah, it's perfectly reasonable.
But I really, I know this. I know that a lot of people aren't going to agree with me, but I think if you call yourself a lesbian, then you're a lesbian. And there are lots of lesbians, for example, who feel connected to that identity category but don't actually identify as women themselves. They might identify as non-binary, or they might, identify in another way. Lots, like, some use they, them, or he, him pronouns, and that is accepted by some lesbians, and then some lesbians are completely what's the word? Some lesbians are completely like uncomfortable with that, which I think is just unimaginative, to be honest. And then there are some people who, especially this political lesbianism developed quite a few years ago now, in which women were sort of identifying as being lesbians, although it was really about rejecting men and trying to like live without them, if that makes sense. And I kind of understand that as an idea, especially where women were feeling so controlled by men and whatever. But I really kind of reject it if there's no mention of like sexual desire or romantic desire for basically people of either perhaps the same gender identity as you or the same sex as you. Like, I know that's a bit long-winded.
No. We like long-winded. Long-winded is good. Joey, what do you think of what does it mean to you? Those two terms.
So, gay. That's not nice. Oh, shut up, Siri.
Oh.
Gay for me is someone who identifies as the same sex as they are attracted to. So that could be someone who identifies masculine and is attracted to someone else who identifies in a masculine way, or someone who identifies feminine and identifies and attracted to someone who also identifies in a feminine way. That obviously does then very get skewed if you are gender fluid or gender non-conforming, because you can't necessarily say where the boundary between masculine and feminine is there, and that is quite a hard one to put on. But that's what gay means to me. Whereas lesbian specifically, I always feel a bit disappointed because lesbians have got that lovely word lesbian, and gays don't have that lovely word. That isn't all the words that are specifically for men that describe them as gay, I think,
are quite harsh and Anglo-Saxon, aren't they?
Well, they're all slurs, aren't they? I can't think of one that isn't.
No,
besides gay or homosexual, which actually is generally referred to. It could be both masculine or feminine. I can't think of a word for a gay man that isn't a slur, that isn't just gay man. Anyway, so that's the difference in those two words for me. It's always love it when I have to challenge my gender conforming identity.
I'm so sorry to be a challenge in your life.
I know. Oh no, it's always fascinating because I love trying to work out if there is even a line in my head. Because if because if you'd asked me without listening to what was just said, I would think a lesbian is someone who is identifying as a woman who is attracted to a woman. But I don't disagree with anything that was just said. So yeah, if you put me in a silo and I hadn't listened to all that wonderful thing that was just said, I would be I would have said very much the sort of. I don't think I could really. If someone came up to me and there was this huge hulking male bodybuilder, and they said they were a lesbian, I think I would have trouble accepting that. So I don't know.
I mean, I hear that, but I think that brings us onto like an argument that like. This is not the argument you're using. I don't think you're even really making an argument. But what I mean is like, it brings us onto the argument that a lot of like transphobes make, which is like, yeah, but if so and so came up to you and said they identified as a woman, but they clearly aren't, then you know what's even going to happen? Then no one's going to be safe anymore, and blah blah blah. But like, when does that happen?
Honestly, it's
like it doesn't.
I keep having to have this conversation at work, and it drives me insane. There's this. Certainly that Dahlia, that definitely you are correct. That's not the argument I'm making, because if someone came up to me,
I didn't think you were.
No. It's like if someone came up to me and said they identified any way, which way, that's how I would refer to them and act. I would treat everyone with a dignity in the same way that if someone comes up to me and says my name is Stephen, I don't go, all right, Barbara. Like I'm not. It wouldn't even be a gender thing. If someone came up to me and said their name was Steve, I wouldn't be like, okay, Mark. Like, you refer to people how they wish to be referred, regardless of whether it's their name or their gender or anything else. It's common decency to be a nice person and treat people with respect and dignity. But the number of times at work where it's like, well, you've got to remember that if we start letting men into the changing room, it's not safe for women. I was like, but we're not talking about letting men into the changing room. We're talking about letting women into the changing room. Yes, but they have penises. Okay?
Oh goodness, because you work at a gym, don't you?
I do.
So you've had this whole
conversation.
It's amazing how many athletes suddenly just appear out of nowhere and are terrified of changing rooms whenever this comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then everyone's concerned. And then you start, as a gay man, for several years, my job was to go into the changing rooms every 30 minutes and make sure that they were still respectable and clean and tidy. For several years, that was my job. And no one batted an eyelid.
Sorry, do you want to say that again? I was like interrupting you.
It's okay. I'd say as a gay man, I was a bigger threat to all the men in that room. Not that I would sexually assault someone, but I am a bigger threat to those men in that room than a trans woman is to all the women in their changing room, regardless of what stage of their transition they're in. Perverts and people who are going to commit sexual assaults are not going to be stopped by a sign on a door.
Mm-hmm.
So why people think it is a legitimate argument to say you can't use that changing room? Stop sexualizing changing rooms. It's completely normal. Stop sexualizing toilets. You use the same toilet as your other sex or other gendered people in your house. It's no different in public. They're not open plan toilets. It boggles my mind. Anyway, yeah. It's just a reductive argument. It drives me mad every time I hear it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one that we could explore at length and in detail. But so I started with those two, sort of gay and lesbian, because I think we can all agree that they are sexual orientations, right? And the definition of that is the person's identity in relation to the gender to which you are sexually attracted. So usually, if you are gay or lesbian, you are sexually attracted to a person of the same gender as you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are romantically attracted to them, or that you are desirous of any other part of anything other than just sex. So this is why. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yes,
Because in the same way that I've had this discussion with you in more recent times, Jerry, about why I'm starting to use the word queer for myself now, and I go by he, they. It's because for me, and we're going to talk about gay and lesbian and so forth in a moment, I have a pretty low sex drive anyway. So actually assigning myself as gay suggests that I have a higher sex drive than I do, because it's saying I'm only spending time with men because I'm sexually attracted to them. I have a deep and intimate and meaningful emotional relationship with a few very close friends, but I don't necessarily find myself sexually attracted to them. So am I still gay?
Yes, but I don't separate my sexual attraction with my romantic attraction. For the most part, apart from the very odd occasion where I am sexually attracted to a woman, but that is very, very rare that happens. And it's only happened once in the last 15 years.
But also, like, can't you can have like deep emotional connections with people regardless of gender, like, and not be romantically or sexually attracted to them.
I think the fascinating part of that is when you start thinking about someone who might identify as bisexual but only has romantic relationships with one gender. So they might be hetero romantic, but they might be bisexual in terms of they're like very happy to have sex with a man.
Men who have sex with men.
But they're not, there's no romantic attraction to it at all. They have no desire to spend time outside of the carnal pleasures of the skin with men. There's no romantic feeling of longing there. It is very much a physical thing. And I can see how that could be doable to separate the two. It's just this. It just doesn't happen for me, except for that one time.
I think that I'm going to speak for all lesbians again.
You're entitled to. Once you appear on this show, you are entitled to speak on behalf of vast swaths of the population. I have decided.
Yeah. So, and I think that this is where the differences in, and I don't mean this to be gender essentialist or biologically essentialist, but this is where the differences between people of different genders show up a little bit, because while, and I've got nothing to back this up other than, what I've experienced and what people have said to me. So, if you've got some stats that prove me wrong, like, please let me know. But like, of all the lesbians I know, how can I put this? Like, lesbians I know are perhaps more likely or have slept with more men than the gay men I know have slept with or are likely to sleep with women, if that makes sense. And I was literally talking to my partner about this earlier, and this is just, because men are just more available and it's easier for us. Okay. And like, I think, there's many reasons as to why that is. On a really surface, like, not serious level, it's just because they tend to just be more like available, as in straight men who want to sleep with women. But then on a sort of a more deep level, there's a bit of an understanding in, I'm not even going to say just the lesbian community, but in the community of like either like women who like women, like bisexual women, lesbians, dykes, what have you, that it is harder to, there is a lot of fear around approaching each other, that obviously this is my experience, that I think is slightly different than what men, including gay men, experience. And I think this is down to the fact that women, or like people that have been assigned female, have kind of grown up with a lot more sort of sexual expectations put on them, and grown up with like, all these different things, like sort of being told like you're a slut, or if you look like this, or if you do this, or just having so much scrutiny like placed upon you. And also having so much unwanted sexual attention from men that, like, I think other lesbians will attest to this, like, it's kind of understood that there's a lot more fear of doing doing to other people who are assigned female at birth or have gone through the same thing or has been done to you, if that makes sense. Like putting them through the same, there's a lot, and I think that's kind of a bit of internalized homophobia as well. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a combination of like internalized homophobia and a bit of fear of being that, I don't want to say predatory, that's too much, like just being likened to this kind of predatory male idea, which I think also gets put on lesbians, or maybe used to get put on lesbians a bit. I've gone on such a tangent, like I don't know if this is relevant.
No, I think there's definitely something to do with the patriarchy and certain ideologies that relate back to this. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. But from what I'm picking up from both of you, really, is that whilst we like labels, they can also be that they end up conveying something that's an absolute, and they can be kind of difficult to navigate away from once that's decided. And if we then come to believe we can't change because of a label that either we've been ascribed or we've given ourselves, are we cementing certain assumptions about ourselves, certain things around who we are and how we are to be treated and presented to by the world? So I've got a few more labels to throw at you, and we'll see what they kind of mean. I will say, I've mentioned already, I tend to use queer more than gay because that's very much an umbrella term. If I was to go into it, there's probably also demisexual in there. There's stuff around my neurotypes as well. There's all sorts of other weird and wonderful complexities because I'm a strange person. But it would take a long time to explain all of that when I could just use a shorthand label. So here are some other ones to throw at you. Would you prefer to be called dyslexic or special educational needs? You have dyslexia or you have special educational needs. Which would you prefer to have said about you?
Dyslexic.
I'll carry on.
Dyslexic only because it's a bit more specific. I don't need or like the vagueness of special educational needs. I don't. I also worried that people would misconstrue that into thinking that I need assistance where I don't, or pity where I don't. Whereas dyslexia doesn't generally people do tend to think my English is going to be much worse than it is with the dyslexia, but I accept that because some people do struggle considerably more with their dyslexia than I do. I spent a very, very, very long time working on it, and I've got the coping mechanisms that work for me now. But I wouldn't overly be comfortable with such a broad term, I think, to describe my neurodivergence. I like dyslexia works for me on that label.
I think generally speaking, if I was dyslexic, I would rather that term was used most of the time, especially when like in a school setting or in a university setting or work, or when it's relevant. I think the only time I'd want the sort of label special educational needs is perhaps when the conversation is about that as an umbrella term, like when we're describing multiple special educational needs, because I think that dyslexia falls under one of those. I think it's kind of, it would feel a little bit like wishy-washy for someone just to describe you as that when they're not actually explaining. That doesn't tell anybody what you need, right? Like that doesn't, what special educational needs, what are they? So that would be a bit silly. But then, there is a need for umbrella terms as well that can, unite us when we're in a joint effort or when we're in a joint group for a certain reason. Like, let's just say hypothetically, we've got to put we've got something that would help people with ADHD and people who are dyslexic because they both struggle with, I don't know, attention or whatever. That might not even be right. I'm not fully up to date with dyslexia. Does that make sense? Like it sometimes it's relevant.
So I think you sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Very much as Dahlia said, the label isn't useful, therefore you don't want to associate or use it. I think if the label is useful, even if it's useful in that moment and isn't useful 2 hours later, you would use it. So saying that I have special educational needs in a situation is not necessarily useful. I would have to then explain more. So as a label, I wouldn't use it because it's not helpful. It would require more effort. So, and I think it's probably the same with every other label. Thinking about it, you would use a label because it's useful.
So
it aids you in your day to use something because it conveys meaning. Although we are discovering that we all have slightly different understandings of the same word.
Which I think is kind of thing I wanted to talk about. Is you've both hit upon the thing I was hoping that you would do. So I found, because you know, so I went scurrying off looking for research and papers, and I found one in the Educational Psychology, the International Journal of, from 2010, where they looked at labels and self-esteem regarding the impact of using a specific label versus a generic label. And they used this very specific one, which I just asked you about, dyslexia or special educational needs. And they took a whole bunch of kids between 8 and 15, and put them into different groups and referred to them as either dyslexic, having special educational needs, or just, you know, control. And it turned out that the self-esteem scores were such that those who were just put into a sort of general SEN group had significantly lower self-esteem scores than those in the dyslexia group or the control group. And in fact, there was no real significant difference between the self-esteem of people who were told you have dyslexia and those who were just the control group without. And one of the things that they came out of this was that being given that generalized label seemed to somehow negatively affect these children's self-esteem, because unlike the label of dyslexia, it offers very little in the way of an explanation of the kids' academic difficulties. And because there are no targeted interventions that are easy to do for a non-specific label, they weren't getting as much help and support as those who did have a specific label. So they felt that they were more stupid, more difficult, more whatever it was, than those who had the specific.
Well, I suppose that lack of understanding for yourself as well would feed into your own neuroses as well, because you'd be like, I mean,
you've just explained me in a sentence, but well,
yes. I'm shit at this because of this, and if you didn't understand why you were struggling, you would start to equate it to everything that was wrong in your life because you had no understanding of where that boundary was.
Horrible
study. Oh.
Well, yeah. So I think
when was this done? Sorry, did you say
2010?
Good God!
There's been a whole bunch. There's been a whole bunch more that have since there was a meta study I found, which how I got the original one, but there's been a whole bunch more.
1950 or something. Okay.
Oh no! If it had been 1950, there'd have been more beatings and.
Oh yes, and drills into people's gums to see how much they drool and blah blah blah. But you know.
Yes, and we will cover that in another episode, because holy hell, you would not believe some of the shit that went on. Anyway, but you make a very good point there about once you have a label you can assign to something, you become less anxious about it. You start to understand everything makes sense. So this is a story I've told, I think, before. When I started the apprenticeship for the company I work for now, I asked for extra time in exams because I had dyslexia. I knew about this since I was a kid. And they said, well, your last dyslexia assessment was, over 10 years ago when you were at sixth form college. You're going to need to have a new one. And so the company sorted me out to see an educational psychologist. And she did all of the dyslexia assessments. I'm losing my words, aren't I? As soon as I start talking about dyslexia, it becomes impossible for me to speak. It's sort of a verbal dyslexia. And we got all the way through to it, and she said, yep, you're dyslexic, I'll sign all this off. And she just looks across at me and says, so what do you do about your autism? And I'm sat there going,
that's not how you found out.
It is.
Did I know this?
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, sort of sat there for a second and said, what do you mean? She said, well, you're autistic, right? I was like, I don't know, am I? And she went, okay. So we had about a half an hour conversation about it, and she went, well, officially I can't diagnose that because I don't have the right, doctorates and all the rest of it. But yes, for my penny's worth, you are. And I went away and I did some research and went, this answers so many things about me. Because, I mean, Joey, you. I think you could tell within about 10 seconds of meeting me, couldn't you? So
Yeah.
it's.
In fact, knew within with pretty much the end of the first sentence you said to me. But it's only because the way in which you handle conversation is the same way in which another friend of mine handles conversation, and he is also autistic. So it was like looking at a weird clone in the way in which you both process a room full of people. So to me, it was very obvious, but that's only by coincidence that you both had probably the same sort of strategy.
It was quite funny. I'll cut this bit in a minute, but I came out of that and I was due to go and meet James for a drink, and I went into the pub and they just sort of looked at me and went, "Are you all right?" I said, "I've been told apparently I'm autistic," and James just like looked at me and was like, "Yes, we know." Like, and nobody told me, and he's just like,
thought to tell you.
Yeah, I was just like, "Oh, we just assumed that you knew and you're just ignoring it." I was like, "Thanks, I love you too."
You had told me at some point that your mother had drilled it into you to make eye contact with people.
Yes,
and this wasn't a clue to either of you when you were younger.
Well, she ascribed it down to my hyperactivity. Just not being able to, because comorbidities are a thing.
Mm-hmm.
At the age of 2, I had been told, my mother had been told that I was hyperactive, and at 7 had ADHD. Not that we did anything about it, because she'd been terrified into the, oh my god, if you give them drugs, they'll just turn into a zombie thing, which we've had conversations about since. But yes, going back to it, once I was given a label for the things going on in my head and the way in which I perceived the world, it made stuff 20 times easier to cope with. All of these issues that were going on and the way in which I struggled every day to understand, well, just the world around me and people and all of that became much easier because I had a label I could put on it. It made it manageable. It made it something I could control. And again, that might be an autistic thing. I don't know. Once I've defined something, once I can see the shape of it, once I can control it, it's not a problem anymore because then I can deal with it. I can move it around. I can look at it and find a way through. So in that way, that's why I sometimes find labels incredibly useful because, again, they are a shorthand to knowing a significant thing about a person. Now, sometimes that could also be dangerous, right? If we've assigned a label or to somebody, that is not the totality of the person. And could we accidentally fall into a trap of treating a person by that label, and it might only be one small facet of them?
But that ultimately comes down to just being lazy, because you find it when people dismiss the opinion of someone because they're a cleaner. They're like, well, you're just a cleaner. Well, no one is, for starters, no one is just anything. No one is a one-dimensional object or a two-dimensional person. No one is just woman cleaner. You have no idea what they've done with the entirety of their life. This might be an area that they've spent a huge amount of time reading up on. Let's not dismiss someone because of a label. And that's just, it's just very, very lazy to do that, really. But because we are very desperate to categorize and understand things generally as a species, there is the desire to jump depths to understand something quicker. It's difficult because I know we all do it, but also at the same time, kind of lazy. Get to know the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if you're going to make lots of assumptions about someone based on an identity category that they ascribe to, and yeah, absolutely, that's the wrong way to go about it. And then at the same time, if people who belong to an identity category sort of like share certain things, kind of indulge in a little bit of, I don't want to say stereotypes, but just like, I'll use myself as an example, just being like, yeah, of course I want to help you put shelves up. I'm gay. You know what I mean? Like, if
you mean you don't have your own tool belt and amazing shelves?
I do.
All my stereotypes of lesbians are blown out of the water.
A and you can have a lot of fun with that, but it's like that sort of thing, in my opinion, I think that sort of thing should only be used purely for fun, and like really ought to be sort of directed by the person who falls under that identity label, if that makes sense. Like if they invite you to engage in that kind of like labeling, then go for it. And then, but some people really don't, and that's fine too. Like some people are like, yes, I am gay, but that doesn't mean I want to go out clubbing at, this is a very basic example, but this doesn't mean I want to go out clubbing at Heaven every night. You know what I mean?
You're talking to two people in their 30s here. I don't want to go out clubbing.
I always find this is something that I've been thinking about recently with regards to how people label their sexuality and the spectrum of sexuality. But if you were to talk to a heterosexual man and you were to ask him what women he's attracted to, what are the physical and mental characteristics that make you attracted to a woman or your current girlfriend, and then you met another heterosexual man and you asked him exactly the same question, the answer would be different. There would be some overlap, but they would give you different answers. They would be like, "Well, I'm a boobs man," or I like people who are really passionate about collecting stamps, or it doesn't matter what it is.
It's all about the stamp collecting.
It's always about the stamp collecting. It could be, someone could be into bums and someone could be into people who love weightlifting, or it could be anything. But and then you start asking them, okay, so what are your kinks? What are the things that turn you on in the bedroom? They would both give you different answers, and you keep going and going and going, and there'd be people who overlap. But all those people would describe themselves as heterosexual men, but they would give you a different answer as to what it actually meant to them entirely. Because they are not the same kind of straight, because they're not. They're attracted to different things in different women, and they're attracted to, when they've met that woman, the things that then sexually excite them when they're in the bedroom are different things as well. So their sexuality isn't the same, but it is labelled the same because they're straight men. But actually, when you break it down, even very quickly, it starts going off in all sorts of tangents, which is the thing that I find so fascinating about sexuality, is that it's so bonkersly diverse, and it's always boiled down into the most broadest terms, and it never actually fits at all.
I've been thinking about this also in terms of things like, I suppose, the limits of labels, and it's sort of, as we've been talking, it's sort of comes to the top of my head is that, if I'm going to use autistic, for example, neurotypical and autistic or neurodivergent, these are very coarse labels. People can be more or less autistic or LGBTQ or ADHD or dyslexic or whatever it may be. It's an individual experience of the world put through a particular cognitive lens. And, when we say one of these labels, we're covering such a wide spectra of behaviours and experiences within that. I wonder actually how useful they are, rather than sort of saying I'm into stamp collecting is a lot more informative than saying I am gay, for example. I don't know. Maybe that means nothing.
No, it means something. I was just sort of processing it and having a think about it.
I mean, I got labelled by one of the architects as a leveller.
What does that mean?
Which
a leveller?
A leveller.
As in you like everyone to be on an equal playing field?
Yeah, 1640s. We're talking the sort of after the Civil War. Yeah.
Could you?
Because
I'm still a bit confused.
Well, so I go into an awful lot of meetings dealing with lots of sort of international things, but principally I'm often the most junior person in the room. But I think because of the way in which my own sort of internal moral compass operates, I don't really put that much value on social status or those sort of related cultural rules of earned respect and so forth. It's not that I'm lacking empathy or anything, but I just tend to treat everyone as the same, everyone on the same level until they have proven otherwise. In the way that I don't believe that anyone should necessarily be elevated above anyone else. because that doesn't feel right to me. So it was just interesting that people found quite an old label to assign to the way in which I go about how I do my work.
Well, I have read though that is a common autistic trait, like not quite falling in line with with social hierarchies that don't really make sense to them, like not necessarily treating people as better than others just because of their social status, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question for you then. What happens when a label shifts in meaning? So,
You mean so like gay becoming to mean stupid or dumb or silly? It can be very harmful. Obviously, it depends which way it goes. Because like you can reclaim labels like the use of the N-word or the use of queer now to mean used in a positive way. So you're reclaiming something that has been used derogatively and to cause harm. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And then there is obviously always the harm of it. Obviously, it goes the other way. And then a label that you've used to identify yourself comes to mean something derogative. It depends which way it goes.
Are there any examples of that?
What, of going negatively?
Yeah.
Well, so that's so gay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously queer, now Simon quite happily conveys himself with the word queer, but queer is originally a derogative term. It means strange. It literally means it's strange or weird.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm not going to start calling myself a Ganymede, am I? So
and technically, does lesbian come from the people
Lesbos, the island.
Lesbos, the island. So
yeah.
So
who were known for their orgiastic sex, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, lesbians obviously have the word dyke, which was a
That's true,
word.
yes.
And
You're
a lot of
very good at holding back floods.
yeah, I wish I'd looked into what that meant beforehand. I've never really given it that much thought or research, if I'm honest. I'm fully aware that it was a slur, and I was quite offended by it, and for a few years ago, and then I realised that. Now, I mean, this is just from my perspective, but I think a lot of people who identify as lesbians or sort of fall somewhere under the lesbian umbrella, but are maybe a little bit, let's just say a little bit more, I want to say adventurous. No, that's not right. Those who maybe don't necessarily subscribe so much to all the different things that you're supposed to be if you're a lesbian, that kind of came out of more political lesbianism and sort of separatist lesbianism and so on. I think the word dyke just so amazingly has come to kind of cover all different people who identify as lesbians, especially those who maybe don't identify as women, but then still kind of feel connected to some aspects of being a lesbian or being a dyke, if that makes sense. You can still call yourself a dyke and have sex with men if you want to, for example. You can be a bit more of a rule breaker. I think that's kind of what I like about that word.
So I've picked up one of my books here, and I've just looked it up. We'll start off with where gay comes from. Well, actually, it starts off by saying queer was once a term signifying disgust, but is now pronounced with a difference. Gay comes from who knows where. It could be construed as a derivation of guy in Old Provençal, meaning merry or vivacious, or from geris in Gothic, meaning impetuous, or from gahai in Frankish, meaning fast. Whatever the language, it is used to connote frantic fun and high spirits. In English, gay was originally attached to female prostitutes and the men who chased them. The female variants... Sorry,
but also gay was... Really? Oh, fascinating. Okay. Obviously, it also meant happy.
So, yeah. Well, it became known as happy because they were having sex, so they were happy.
Having such fun times.
Fascinating.
It was the Americans in the 40s shifted it to mean homosexual men. The female variants of same-sex passion included sapphist. Oh, I like that, sapphist.
Oh yeah, I haven't thought of that word.
And lesbian, after the peerless poet of Lesbos. I mean, the term first appears in the 1730s. Saphists often became sapph in the early 20th century. There are allusions to tribades or tribadig women, fritteris, one who rubs, and subbutris, one who works a furrow. A Tommy can be found in the 18th century and is first mentioned in the Sapphic Epistle of 1777. Butch, femme, dyke, bull dyke, and diesel dyke can still sometimes be heard. So they all come from that book in 1777. What's this? A diesel dyke just sounds like, I want to say it sounds like a motorcyclist.
So is that where Tommy Two Ways comes from?
Maybe
Sorry.
Yes.
With being a dyke who rides a bike.
Well, there is a group called Dykes on Bikes. They're a lovely.
I'm familiar with them. They're a lot of fun.
Really?
Oh no, not like that. No, I just think they're cool.
There are 22 different chapters of Dykes on Bikes. I've just been looking. Anyway, carry on.
Yes. Well, we can certainly talk about some of these things further into the future, but I'm thinking, let's move on to the next section of this. Has anyone spotted anything fun or interesting in the news this week?
I think fun in the news. You mean like we were better off in the EU?
I mean, we've known this since, May of 2016.
I think we knew this since we joined in the 70s, but let's not.
I mean, Rishi Sunak's little speech about Ireland.
Oh my god. They're in a unique position. No, that's what we all have.
Yeah, they're in this amazing, brilliant position. No one else has it, and you're so lucky to be in this position. And you're like, you mean like the rest of Europe? You mean like where we were? Okay. When are we going to stop pretending as a political establishment that this was a good idea? Let's accept that it was a mistake. We've all made it. We all do it. We've made mistakes, and then let's just not do it anymore. Let's just stop pretending it's fine and keep digging the hole. How deep does the hole have to be before people start understanding it was a problem?
Well, and again, back to the labels thing, is actually things like Remainer and Brexiteer and so forth are unhelpful labels now because they push somebody to the extreme of each end of that argument without actually understanding the nuance.
You start assuming that everyone who voted to leave is racist and it was all about border control, when I'm sure plenty of people voted for it because the EU was quite ineffectual at the time and they didn't understand any of the benefits that the EU was giving them, and it was costing lots of money. So there were genuine reasons why people didn't like the EU besides foreigners.
Yeah,
but
and they were
at the
promised
moment,
what was it? How much for the NHS again?
350 million a week.
Yeah, I was going to say 30 million. No, 350 million. Okay, no. Yeah, you're right.
So
That's a great example. Sorry, I was just going to say that is a really good example of like when labels are quite unhelpful. So I'm glad you put that in.
Oh, I occasionally have thoughts for the podcast. So
Good thoughts.
think of a label that you would apply to Mike Tyson.
I mean, apart from boxer,
Scary?
violent,
I was thinking scary.
unstable. I think that.
So let me give you another.
To be honest, I
label
don't know him
for
that well.
Pigeon fancier.
That's
He
not
breeds pigeons
Oh, Jesus.
and takes them to races.
Do they race each other?
Good for him.
Do they race each other, the pigeons?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. I have a really good
okay.
news story, but it's nothing to do with
Oh,
labels.
yes, please. That's fine. Go on. What's the interesting thing?
So because I'm in the union called United Sex Workers, another label.
And we're pro-union, so that's good.
Yeah. There's somebody I follow on Twitter who made a post a few days ago about how she suspected something was like wrong with her client, thinking that he was unwell, and he was like, "Nah, I'm fine." And later on, it turned out that he had to go to had to go to hospital. And he was fine, but there's an article now in the Daily Star about her. Sex worker demands men, quotes, listen to prostitutes, unquote, after diagnosing punter's condition. So this person told how she didn't like the sound of his chest, and the bloke ended up in intensive care. In a candid.
That's amazing.
I just thought that was so funny.
Doctor sex worker.
I mean, I'm sorry that he's in intensive care, but it's just the fact.
Well, no, that's a good thing, because if he
Yeah.
hadn't been caught, he'd be in a grave. So
Yeah. So, you know, if your sex worker tells you to do something, follow their advice. They're very smart.
yes, always do what your sex worker tells you to do, especially if she has whips and chains.
Spend lots of money.
And lots of money on sex workers.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to move house soon. I can't afford it.
Yeah, I'm given what you said earlier. It's probably not really what you want.
Well, they don't really want to just listen to me talk for an hour. It's very expensive therapy.
Yeah, and that is half of what we do.
Act as therapists for people.
100%.
Anyway, well, that's a label you can
That's
put
a
on yourself,
label,
isn't it?
yeah.
That's a label, therapist.
Yeah. I just don't have the doctorate.
Yeah, well, you will do soon. You're working on this, remember?
Working on it.
Any other things that we can talk about, Joey? Any thoughts? Any interesting, funny things?
I don't know.
Well, it was Kemi. I can't remember her surname. Brandenburg, the women's minister,
Yeah.
who was literally in the select committee and saying, well, we don't need to have any kind of leave for women who are struggling with menopause. I support women. I think all women know what I've done for them. It's like, love, you're literally saying that they don't deserve to what?
Also, sorry, but I don't think she's reached the. I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't actually. Yeah, don't let me be commenting on her menopause or not on the podcast.
And also, people. Yeah, in the same way that it would be wrong for one woman to say periods are not a problem. Well, okay, good for you that your periods aren't a problem, but there are some people who really suffer.
I've heard a lot of really bad takes on.
Yeah,
on that.
and it's the same with menopause. Some women struggle, and some people don't have anywhere near the level of difficulty with their menopause. And obviously, everyone has some obvious change because their hormones have completely 180'd.
Yes.
But it's it's like saying it would be no different really to saying that, well, my autism doesn't really cause me any issues. Well done, good for you, congratulations. Would you like an award?
Yes.
Whereas there's someone down the road who can't go out the house by themselves because they are locked into themselves. That their autism is that much of an effect on their ability to cope with the world around them. So it's why can't people just speak for themselves and then rely on experts when they need to think about other people? He says it's making his unfounded views without consulting experts on a podcast. Yeah.
Well, we are experts because we have a podcast, so that's how it works, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we are.
I do have some.
Yeah.
Well researched. All my views. Mm.
Well, I mean, I do read a lot of papers before we come on this podcast. There is actually research that goes into
count.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts on labels?
They are sometimes good and sometimes bad.
Yes, they're sometimes useful, sometimes unuseful.
Yeah, labels that are useful to you are useful, but don't. I think ultimately don't assume that the label that is useful for you is necessarily useful for someone else. Don't project, because sometimes it can be quite harmful.
Well,
don't assume.
I am Simon. I am neuroqueer, and I host this podcast. Those are my labels. I don't know if they're any use to anyone, but I'm not going to assign them to anyone else. I mean, I'll call you both hosts of a podcast. I don't know if that's a label that's useful or not. But...
Yeah, don't call me Simon.
I think it's quite useful.
I mean, I'm not going to call you Simon. That would confuse me.
Yeah, it's your name. Exactly.
I know. Well, it's the one I chose to use anyway.
And it's the only way you can differentiate me from the other voices in your head. La 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 la. No one's real.
I mean, you don't exist. I'm just sat in a room on my own. All of this is imagined.
Very impressive.
I know. And people say autistic people don't have any imagination.
Yeah, you've got me thinking I'm real.
Are you real?
I'm fairly positive if someone somewhere is scrolling out on the mouse wheel and seeing this from above, and it's just The Sims.
They just keep clicking the button that says "talk bullshit, talk
Yeah.
bullshit."
Well, if we're The Sims, can I request that you start using some cheat codes for me, please?
Yeah.
Motherload.
Yeah, Rosebud.
Motherload. That was it.
It was Rosebud as well. I think that in the first Sims, I think Rosebud was the cheat code for money. Ah, dear.
One day.
I always wondered if that was like a reference.
To
What, Rosebud?
what's that film called? Citizen Kane. Yeah.
That's the last thing he says is Rosebud, and he's supposed to be the richest man in the world.
Ah, well, there you go.
Anyway, I think we've definitely been talking for long enough because we've gone off down some very odd tangents there. Thank you, as ever, to my wonderful colleagues. I know some of the things that we have discussed can be a little bit difficult, but I think it's important for us to have this conversation about labels and the terms we use to describe ourselves and each other. We've obviously shared our own views, our own opinions, our own lived experiences. Some of the stuff we've discussed might be emotional, might trigger feelings in you. And I just hope that by having what I think was quite a respectful conversation, you've all learned something and can consider it and grow as wonderful human beings. So anyway, like I say, thank you to my co-hosts as ever for joining me. So thank you to Dahlia, thank you to Joey, and thank you to you, listener, for tuning in. And we'll speak to you again sometime soon. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Shall I tell you something? That Dahlia is into knitting and has found a certain person's knitting patterns.
Oh, good God! How does he continue to crop up in this podcast? It boggles the mind. Friend of the show, Tom Daly, he did something the other day that I thought about that we should bring him up for as well, and I can't think what it was. It's going to annoy me now. He started his own podcast.
How did we get him on?
Collaboration.
We'll have to do a collaboration.
Oh no, we can't. Oh, do you know who his first guest was?
Who?
Go on.
Shania Twain.
No.
Yes.
Wow.
I was disgusted. To be fair though, it felt more like an interview than a podcast. They did a bit of back and forth, but it was mostly very interesting to learn about what Shania was thinking. But it wasn't a nice conversation. I think it was a bit too interviewy.
Is Tom Daly just going to chat to all of his all of these gay icons and just make everyone jealous?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
I
do wonder. Yeah, he can come talk to us. I'm a gay icon.
That's a label, gay icon.
There's got to be a use to all this charity work we do. Otherwise, my God, why are we doing it?
I'll try and get his invites to the Attitude annual awards, shall I?
Why?
Oh, that'd be nice.
Why don't we just keep mentioning him? It'll happen. It will pop up one day by accident.
Yeah. Okay. Tom Daly. I'll
put it as a hashtag in the
just at
podcast,
him at him every episode. And then just post it on Twitter and at him. Friend of the show, Tom Daly. Just harass him. It's completely fine.
For the benefit of the listener, do not harass celebrities. Please do not harass celebrities. This is not advice we are giving you.
Yeah, yes. I'm not condoning harassing any celebrities or anybody at all, and that
anybody,
quite easily
regardless of their fame.
Cut out. I'm just getting silly.
I mean, given that
we need a revolution.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I'm sharpening the blade for the guillotine now. That's definitely being cut.